What's gaming gamers? Today I've got a build for you using the Hunter Chest Exotic Lucky Raspberry and the Arc subclass. This build makes use of the Arc Bolt grenade, ionic traces, and groups of enemies to constantly refund you grenade energy, allowing you to spam throw grenades as much as you want. This build shines in low to mid level content, so if you're looking for an endgame viable Hunter build, check out my Hunter Void build I posted earlier this week. The first thing I'll talk about is the exotic, the Lucky Raspberry chest piece. Lucky Raspberry has the exotic perk Probability Matrix. Probability Matrix grants your Arc Bolt grenades extra chaining capabilities, as well as giving them an additive 25% chance per chain to fully refund your grenade ability. Arc Bolt grenades by default have 3 chains, but Probability Matrix increases that to 4, meaning that hitting a full chain will instantly fully recharge your Arc Bolt grenade. Now that you know the basics of the exotic, I'll go over the subclass build I recommend. I'll put everything as a prescriptive setup on screen first, and after, I'll explain what each part of the build does, along with some alternative setups if you'd like to try some different things. Firstly, run the Gathering Storm Super. Run the Marksman's Dodge, whichever jump you prefer, the Disorienting Blow Melee, the Arc Bolt Grenade, the Lethal Current aspect, the Flow State aspect, Spark of Beacons, Spark of Discharge, Spark of Ions, and Spark of Shock. For your super, Gathering Storm is a really strong option. Gathering Storm, on top of dealing really good damage, will also jolt any targets hit by it, which will stun unstoppable champions and summon ionic traces for you due to the Spark of Ions fragment. Arc Staff may have some niche uses in PvE, but overall, Gathering Storm brings more utility and more damage to the table while also being safer and easier to use in more difficult content. For your dodge, it's entirely your choice which to use. Generally, with the Combination Blow Melee ability, Gambler's Dodge is the better option, but in more difficult content, this is incredibly risky without the Assassin's Cowl exotic helmet, and even then it's a finicky loop to pull off. I'm of the opinion that Marksman's Dodge will grant you more utility if you're using this build in Legend or Master content, but use both of them and see which you prefer. For your melee ability, they're both decent options, although they're not terribly strong melees in and of themselves. The Combination Blow Melee will instantly refund your class ability if you get a kill with it, as well as healing you a small amount. It has a short cooldown of 40 seconds, but it doesn't do much damage and can be hard to get kills with it safely in Legend or Master content. The Disorienting Blow Melee has a lot more utility as it blinds any target hit by it, which intrinsically stuns unstoppable champions. Hitting an enemy with the charged melee also instantly amplifies you, which is a really simple, easy way to become amplified. I'd recommend the Disorienting Blow, which, despite its 1 minute 40 second cooldown, is good in Legend level content with unstoppable champions, as well as being good for taking an enemy out of the fight for a short period to focus it down or to focus on clearing some ads. Onto your grenade, as this build uses the Lucky Raspberry chest piece, the Arc Bolt grenade is the only option. When thrown, the Arc Bolt grenade will search for and damage the nearest enemy, and then will search for the closest enemy and chain to them. By default, it can chain 3 times, damaging 4 total enemies, but with Lucky Raspberry, its chaining capabilities are increased, allowing it to chain up to 4 times, damaging 5 total enemies. It's actually a pretty fun grenade, despite its low damage, and it has the second lowest base cooldown of all arc grenades at 1 minute 45 seconds. Now, I'll go over the aspects for this build. Firstly, run the Flow State aspect. Flow State will grant you the Amplified status after defeating any target who is jolted, simply increasing your Amplified uptime. It also enhances your Amplified status, granting you 200% class ability recharge rate, significantly faster reload speeds, and a damage resistance while in your dodge animation. These buffs are only active while you're amplified, however, so Amplified uptime is important for this build overall. For your second aspect, I use Lethal Current, which, after using your dodge ability, will cause your next powered melee attack to jolt the target it hits. This will both stun overload champions and grant you amplified upon killing that enemy. I like Lethal Current because it means the Disorienting Blow can stun both overload and unstoppable champions. Granted, this isn't effective in Master or harder content, and even some Legend content, but for running things like the Seasonal Battlegrounds, Dares of Eternity, Pyro Nightfall Strikes, even some Legend Lost sectors, the melee ability dealing with 2 types of champions by itself means you can run whatever weapons you want without having to worry about running the specific anti-champion weapon types. Onto your fragments, these are pretty standard choices for arc builds that aren't built around the melee ability. Firstly, use Spark of Beacons. This one causes enemies to explode in blinding light upon being killed by an arc special weapon while you're amplified. This does mean you should run an arc special weapon, and I'll talk more about weapons later in the video, but if you aren't running an arc special weapon, swap Spark of Beacons out for Spark of Amplitude. Spark of Amplitude will create an orb of power upon rapidly defeating enemies while amplified on a 10-second cooldown. This does well to increase your orb of power generation, which in turn increases the uptime of your armor charge and your super, as well as any armor mods that make use of orbs of power to regenerate ability energy. Second, run Spark of Discharge. Spark of Discharge will grant your arc weapons an escalating chance to spawn an ionic trace, and upon collection of this ionic trace, you will be granted 12.5% grenade energy, 12.5% melee energy, and 15% class ability energy. Spark of Discharge will summon an ionic trace on average every 3 kills, with elites, mini-bosses, and bosses summoning 1 on every 2nd kill or on every kill. There is no cooldown for Spark of Discharge, which means the faster you can kill enemies, the more ionic traces you'll summon. Third, run Spark of Ions. Spark of Ions is super simple. It will spawn an ionic trace upon killing an enemy who is jolted. Spark of Ions has a 10-second cooldown, which is denoted in the buffs and debuffs section in the bottom left of your HUD. This means Spark of Ions can only generate 1 ionic trace every 10 seconds, but that just means you get a free ionic trace every 10 seconds. Lastly, and possibly most importantly, run Spark of Shock. Spark of Shock causes your arc grenades to jolt targets they hit. However, as far as my testing indicated, this only works with the arc bolt grenade on the first enemy hit, not any subsequent enemies hit by the chaining ability. While this is unfortunate if true, Spark of Shock is still a fantastic fragment, as applying Jolt will proc Spark of Ions to spawn you an Ionic Trace, it will proc the Flow State aspect, which makes you amplified upon defeating a jolted target, and as you're now amplified, it will proc Spark of Beacons or Spark of Amplitude, whichever of the two you've equipped. Now that the subclass build is out of the way, I'll go over a couple artifact mods you should equip if you're playing during Season 20, the Season of Defiance. In the first column, grab an anti-barrier mod, whether that be for pulse rifles or sidearms, as this build only allows you to deal with overloads and unstoppables with abilities. In the second column, select the authorized grenades mod, which will decrease the cost of any armor mod that affects your grenades to 1 energy, allowing you to slot more. In the third column, grab the Shatter Orbs mod, which will summon an orb of power upon destroying the shield of a combatant with the corresponding damage type. Next, grab the Defined Armory mod, which will enhance the Ambush, Nanotech Tracer Rockets, Noble Deeds, and Text Balance stock origin traits. The Ambush origin trait can be found on seasonal weapons from the Season of the Seraph. The Nanotech Tracer Rockets origin trait can be found on weapons from Neomuna. The Noble Deeds origin trait can be found on seasonal weapons from the Season of Defiance. And the Text Balance stock origin trait can be found on weapons from the Spire of the Watcher dungeon. In the fourth column of the artifact, grab the Origin Hones artifact mod. This will cause all weapons with the Ambush, Nanotech Tracer Rockets, Noble Deeds, and Text Balance stock origin traits to be overcharged in activities that allow overcharging. Lastly, for the fifth column of the artifact, select the Prismatic Transfer mod. Prismatic Transfer grants your teammates a 20% damage bonus to their weapons for 10 seconds upon the casting of your super, so long as their subclass element is one that differs from yours. This damage bonus doesn't stack with other empowering buffs, like Radiant or Weapons of Light, but is a decent boost if those buffs aren't active. Now to get into the armor setup for this build. Firstly, I'll go over stat distribution. In the top 3 stat grouping of Mobility, Resilience, and Recovery, prioritize Resilience first, Mobility second, and Recovery third. For the bottom 3 stat grouping of Discipline, Intellect, and Strength, spec into Discipline first, with Strength as a secondary stat, and ignore Intellect completely. My armor has me at Tier 7 Mobility, Tier 9 Resilience, Tier 3 Recovery, Tier 9 Discipline, Tier 3 Intellect, and Tier 4 Strength. For armor mods, I'll put everything on screen as a prescriptive setup and then describe each mod in detail, as well as alternative options if there are any. On your helmet, run an Ashes to Assets mod and 2 Harmonic Siphon mods. On your arms, run a Firepower mod, a Momentum Transfer mod, and an Impact Induction mod. On your chest piece, run 2 Charged Up mods and a Harmonic Resistance mod. On your legs, run a Stacks on Stacks mod and an Arc Surge mod. Lastly, on your cloak, run 1 Bomber mod and 2 Time Dilation mods. Now, I'll get into more detail regarding the armor mods. For your helmet, the Ashes to Assets mod will grant you extra super energy upon getting a kill with your grenade. I'm unsure of exactly how much super energy you get per mod equipped, but it is a noticeable boost to super energy, so I recommend picking up the 1 mod. The Arc Bolt grenades don't get many kills themselves, especially if you're throwing them at higher health enemies or champions to jolt them, so I wouldn't recommend grabbing more than 1 Ashes to Assets mod. The 2 Harmonic Siphon mods will grant you an Orb of Power upon getting multi-kills with any arc weapon, which will both give you armor charge and super energy. Having 2 of the Harmonic Siphons will increase the potency of the generated orb, letting it grant you more super energy than if you were to only have 1 equipped. Onto your arms, the Firepower mod will summon an Orb of Power upon getting a kill with your grenade. There is an internal 1-second cooldown on this, so you'll only get 1 Orb of Power per grenade kill, but this mod is effectively equivalent to having a second Ashes to Assets mod on your helmet without having to slot a second Ashes to Assets mod. The Momentum Transfer mod will grant you 20% melee ability energy upon dealing damage with your grenade and has an internal cooldown of 7 seconds. This will help significantly with ensuring you have your Blinding Punch up when you need it, and will allow you to use your melee ability less sparingly, as you know you have the guaranteed 20% boost to your melee's charge every 7 seconds. The Impact Induction mod will grant you 20% grenade energy when dealing damage with a melee attack, which helps significantly if your grenade doesn't chain to enough enemies and doesn't fully recharge. Impact Induction also has an internal 7-second cooldown, and this is more important for Impact Induction specifically, as both powered and unpowered melees will grant you the grenade energy. If you want, you can run 2 of either Momentum Transfer or Impact Induction. If you run 2 of one of the mods, they will grant 25% energy to their respective ability instead of 20%, which I don't find to be a significant enough boost to forego the 20% energy granted to the other ability. If your Strength or Discipline stat are Tier 7 or lower, you can also use a Font of Vigor or Font of Focus mod to increase their respective stat by 3 tiers. It's up to you which you run though. If you prefer the passive stat bonuses from the font mods, equip those. If you prefer the active ability energy gains from the Momentum Transfer and Impact Induction mods, run those. Play with them both and see which one suits your specific needs and playstyle. For your chest piece, it's super straightforward. Run 2 Charged Up mods, which will increase your maximum armor charge stacks from 3 to 5. This increases the amount of time you have to collect Orbs of Power, letting you carry your armor charge from one encounter to the next. Lastly, if you have a slot left, run a Harmonic Resistance mod. This will decrease incoming arc damage by 15% with the 1 mod equipped, which can be the difference between life and death against arc damage heavy enemy factions like the Fallen and Hive. If you need more resistance, you can remove one of the Charged Up mods in favor of running 2 elemental damage resistance mods. This could be helpful in an activity where there's a solar threat and you find yourself dying a lot to that solar damage. 2 elemental damage resistance mods will decrease that element's incoming damage by 25%, which effectively negates the extra damage caused by the threat modifier. Onto your legs, run a Stacks on Stacks mod. This will increase the amount of stacks of armor charge gained per orb pickup by 1 to a maximum of 2. This means your orbs of power will go further, granting you more time of armor charge per pickup, which is helpful in higher difficulty content where you're not generating orbs as frequently. Secondly, run an Arc Surge mod. This will increase the damage output of your arc weapons by 10%, which, despite being slight, is still a boost to your arc weapon damage, and as you'll be using arc weapons constantly to spawn orbs of power and ionic traces, every little bit helps. Lastly, for your cloak, run one Bomber mod. This will grant you 10% grenade energy upon using your dodge ability, which is a useful boost in energy if your grenade doesn't fully recharge itself. Next, run 2 time dilation mods. These together will make your decaying armor charge stacks last for 18 seconds each instead of their base of 10 seconds. With just one time dilation mod, each stack will last for 15 seconds, which by itself is a really good boost. Now, if you're like me and have low recovery, I highly recommend foregoing one of the 2 time dilation mods in favor of a Font of Restoration. This will increase your recovery stat by 30 points, or 3 tiers, which is a significant increase to your health regeneration delay and recharge rate. My build has me using 1 Font of Restoration, 1 time dilation, and 1 Bomber mod, although if you don't need the Font of Restoration, 2 time dilations are a really good option for lengthening the amount of time you have armor charge. Now that the armor build as a whole is out of the way, I can go over weapon choices I recommend for this build. I'll first go over the energy slot, describing a couple special weapons you can select if you're running the Spark of Beacons fragment, and then I'll describe a couple primary weapons if you're running the Spark of Amplitude fragment. Then I'll go over a couple heavy weapons I recommend using, and lastly, some exotic weapons that pair really well with this build. Before I go over the weapons, however, I want to let you know about a weapon perk that's super beneficial to the Arc subclass, Volt Shot. Volt Shot is a perk that is found on most Arc weapons that were introduced in or after the Season of Plunder, and it synergizes heavily with Arc 3.0. Volt Shot will, upon reloading after scoring a kill with a weapon that has Volt Shot on it, jolt the next target damaged by the weapon. Defeating this jolted target will instantly amplify you due to the flow state aspect, as well as summoning an Ionic Trace with Spark of Ion so long as it's off cooldown. Volt Shot is a fantastic weapon perk and synergizes with Arc in a similar way that Incandescent synergizes with Solar or Destabilizing Round synergizes with Void. Now, for Arc special weapons, my first recommendation is Forbearance. This is a craftable waveframe special grenade launcher and is acquired from the Vow the Disciple raid. This weapon is simply fantastic. Its role of Ambitious Assassin and Chain Reaction makes it one of the best ad-clearing weapons in the game, and it's Arc, so it synergizes heavily with this build. Secondly, there's the Prodigal Return special grenade launcher from the Season of Defiance. This weapon is also craftable, and its pattern can be acquired by completing seasonal battlegrounds and by focusing it at the war table at the helm. For a roll or two I'd recommend, the roll I'll be putting on my crafted version is Lead from Gold and Volt Shot, but if you're using your kinetic or heavy weapon frequently and getting kills with it, Envious Assassin is a good alternative to Lead from Gold in the first column, with Volt Shot still in its second column. As Volt Shot requires a reload to proc its jolting capabilities, I think Lead from Gold would be better, but Envious Assassin would make you more likely to get a kill before needing a reload. Both are good options, and if you get either of them, this GL is a fun weapon to use. Lastly, the Path of Least Resistance Trace Rifle from the Season of the Seraph is another really good option. This weapon is craftable, however, unfortunately, if you didn't play during Season of the Seraph, this weapon is no longer acquirable. Hopefully Bungie makes old seasonal weapons or their patterns acquirable in the future. As for rolls I recommend for Path of Least Resistance, in the first column, Stats for All is probably the best option. However, if it does become purchasable in Season 21, I might also recommend Shoot to Loot, as that perk will be changed when Season 21 drops to pick up Orbs of Power upon shooting them as well as ammo. This will make Shoot to Loot a good perk in my opinion, and will make acquiring armor charge stacks easier in higher difficulty content, as you won't have to go pick up Orbs of Power yourself. In the second column, I highly recommend Volt Shot, but if you're running Stats for All in the first column, you can also run One for All in the second column, as these two perks synergize heavily with each other. If you don't want a special weapon in your energy slot and are instead looking for primary weapon recommendations, my first one would have to be the Ikelos SMG. I believe the Ikelos weapons are world drops now, which means its pattern is acquirable even though it was introduced during the Season of the Seraph, but if I'm wrong in that assumption, please let me know in the comments. Anyways, the Ikelos SMG is craftable, and I recommend the roll of Threat Detector and Volt Shot. You could also run Perpetual Motion in the third column instead of Threat Detector, but with an SMG, you'll be in the face of plenty of enemies as is, and Threat Detector is really strong when in close proximity to enemies. Another Arc primary weapon I recommend is the Tarnished Metal Scout Rifle from the Season of Plunder. This weapon is craftable, but unfortunately isn't currently acquirable. If you played during Season of Plunder, however, and have the pattern for this gun, it is a fantastic scout rifle. I usually run the tried and true combination of 4th times the charm and explosive payload, but it can roll Volt Shot in its 4th column, and if you were to run Volt Shot there, Rapid Hit would be a good alternative to 4th times the charm to enhance your reload speed and give your weapon its jolting capability from Volt Shot faster. Lastly, for Arc primary recommendations is the Long Arm Scout Rifle from the Spire of the Watcher dungeon. This scout rifle is really fun, feels good to use, and has the Text Balanced Stock Origin trait, which has granted increased efficacy and overcharge capabilities with the Defiant Armory and Origin Hones artifact mods. Long Arm can't roll Volt Shot, which is unfortunate, but it has a couple of good rolls, namely Rapid Hit in the 3rd column and Adrenaline Junkie, Dragonfly, and Explosive Payload in the 4th column. For Arc heavy weapons I recommend, the Terminus Horizon Machine Gun from the Spire of the Watcher dungeon is the first one. This weapon has some really good roll combinations: Compulsive Reloader or Rapid Hit and Volt Shot, Demolitionist and Adrenaline Junkie, Triple Tap and Target Lock. Almost any roll you get with this weapon will be one worth keeping. For this build specifically, I recommend Rapid Hit or Demolitionist and Volt Shot. Volt Shot will proc if you reload the gun by using Marksman's Dodge, which I recommend with the machine gun specifically, as its reload is pretty long, so Demolitionist might be the best option for this specific build, but Rapid Hit would be more useful for arc builds across all 3 classes. Second, there's the Storm Chaser Linear Fusion Rifle from the Duality Dungeon. Despite linear fusions being nerfed, they're still pretty good, and Storm Chaser is no exception. It can't roll Volt Shot, but it has some really good perks. In the third column, there's Rapid Hit, Clown Cartridge, and Autoloading Holster. In the fourth column, there's Firing Line and Frenzy. I have 2 rolls of Storm Chaser that I've kept, those being Autoloading Holster and Frenzy, as well as Rapid Hit and Vorpal Weapon. A Vorpal Weapon isn't the best perk on heavy weapons, as it's only a 10% damage boost to them, but I have yet to get the Rapid Hit Frenzy roll I want, so this one does the trick if I want Rapid Hit for faster reloads against a boss with a shorter damage phase. Lastly, for heavy weapons, I recommend the Swarm Machine Gun from the Nightfall loot pool. This weapon is available while Lake of Shadows is the active Nightfall, and will have an adept version when Lake of Shadows is the weekly Grandmaster. There aren't actually too many perks in this one I recommend, but it's an easy one to farm for when it's the weekly Nightfall weapon, unlike Storm Chaser or Terminus Horizon, which are both dungeon weapons. For the third column, I recommend Feeding Frenzy. For the fourth column, I recommend Dragonfly or Golden Tricorn. Another combo that would work would be Dynamic Sway Reduction in the third column and Target Lock in the fourth column, but that isn't a role I'll be hunting specifically. For exotic weapons, there are a couple arc ones that work really well with this build, with one standard option that is far and away the best, which I'll get to last. These recommendations would be the Trinity Ghoul Bow, the Risk Runner SMG, the Dead Messenger Grenade Launcher, and the Trespasser Sidearm. However, the best weapon for this build overall is the Delicate Tomb Fusion Rifle that was available during the Season of the Plunder Battle Pass, and is now purchasable from the Monument to Lost Lights in the Tower. This fusion rifle synergizes so well with the Arc subclass on top of being fun to use. Its perk, Tempest Cascade, will overcharge its next shot upon collecting an Ionic Trace, dealing 30% increased damage and jolting any target hit by it. Its exotic trait grants it an escalating chance to summon an Ionic Trace every kill it gets, which is separate from the Spark of Discharge fragment, basically doubling your Ionic Trace creation capabilities. Lastly, its Catalyst refills 4 bullets from reserves to the magazine upon collecting an Ionic Trace, effectively making it so that if you're generating Ionic Traces consistently, you'll never have to manually reload it. Overall, if I were to recommend one weapon for this build, or any arc build, it'd be Delicate Tomb. This weapon is fantastic for any arc build on any class. Now that the build itself is done, I'll talk about a playstyle to accompany this build. This build revolves around jolting as many targets as possible, refunding ability energy, and spamming set abilities as much as possible. Firstly, upon entering an engagement, you can throw your grenade at a group of enemies to jolt them, and then kill that jolted target to become amplified. Use your dodge, then use your melee ability on higher health enemies to blind and jolt them, making them less of a threat to you, which will allow you to deal with them easier, as well as granting you an Ionic Trace as Spark of Ions is off cooldown. Use an arc special weapon to kill adds and create blinding explosions, or use an arc weapon with Volt Shot on it to jolt as many targets as you can, creating as many Ionic Traces as you can. Throw your grenade as soon as it comes off cooldown to jolt even more enemies, and continue the loop from there. Generate as many Ionic Traces as your cooldowns will allow, and throw your abilities basically as they come off cooldown. It's super simple, and I find it really fun because of its simplicity. And that's all for the build. This video ended up being a lot longer than I anticipated, but I wanted to go in depth about weapons specifically, as there are a lot of really fun arc weapons to use in conjunction with this build. If you'd like to join our clan, the Tyrant Seraphs, I'll leave a link in the description to the Bungie website and our Discord, so feel free to check it out and join if you feel like it. As always, if you have any comments or criticisms, leave them in the comments below, and if you liked the video, leaving a like and subscribing both do really well to help the algorithm know this is content people enjoy watching, so I'd appreciate that as well. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next Tuesday with the Titan build. Have a good day.